Helping a frail elderly woman with her property deeds seemed like a simple act of kindness until I realized I'd become the unwitting courier for a massive organized scheme and a target for a lethal investigation. Now, the service of internal verification is closing in, and I have 10 seconds to decide if I want to survive as a witness or be buried by a life-altering charge for a crime I never committed. I've always been the type of person who tries to do the right thing, even when it's inconvenient. Working as a receptionist at a high-end private medical clinic, my days are usually a blur of insurance forms, disgruntled patients, and the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. But Tuesday was different. Mrs. Gable, a regular at our clinic, a frail, sharp-witted woman in her 80s, walked in, trembling. She wasn't here for her usual checkup. Her hands were shaking so hard the paperwork fluttered in her grip like a wounded bird. She told me she was in a panic over a missing deed to her property, something that had been tied up in red tape for months. I didn't think twice. I spent 3 hours of my lunch break and my own time after my shift helping her navigate the online portals, scanning documents, and dealing with the bureaucratic nightmare of the local city hall. When we finally hit submit, she wept with relief. She held my hands, her skin like parchment, and told me I was the only person who had treated her with dignity in years. I felt good. I felt like I'd made a difference. That's when she pulled a manila envelope from her oversized tote bag. It was sealed with heavy-duty packing tape, looking far more official than any medical record. "You are an angel," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the clinic's security camera. "Could you do one last thing for me? My daughter-in-law is coming to the clinic tomorrow, but I forgot to tell her I had this ready. Could you hold on to it and give it to her when she comes in? It's just some personal records. Family matters. I don't trust the courier services." I hesitated. Clinic policy is strict about holding personal items for patients, but looking at her tear-filled eyes, I felt like a monster for even considering saying no. It was just a thin envelope. It felt light, like it contained nothing more than a few sheets of paper. "Of course, Mrs. Gable," I said, tucking it into my desk drawer. "I'll make sure she gets it." The next morning, the clinic was busier than usual. I barely had time to sip my coffee before the front door swung open. A woman strode in, cold, sharp, and dressed in a designer suit that cost more than my car. She didn't look like the daughter-in-law of a sweet, fragile woman. She looked like someone who owned the building. She approached my desk, her eyes scanning the area with the precision of a predator. "I'm here for a delivery," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "My mother-in-law mentioned you have something for me." I reached into the drawer and pulled out the envelope. As I slid it across the glass countertop, the woman's gloved hand clamped over it instantly, her knuckles turning white. She didn't say thank you. She didn't even look at me. She turned on her heel and started toward the exit, but halfway to the door, she stopped. She looked back at me, her expression unreadable, and her phone began to ring. It wasn't a normal ringtone. It was a series of rhythmic, sharp beeps. She glanced at the phone, then at me. "You've been very helpful," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent a cold shiver down my spine. "But you really shouldn't have looked inside, even if you thought no one saw you." I froze. "I haven't opened it," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I swear I didn't touch the seal." She smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a hollow, jagged expression. "It doesn't matter what you say anymore. My people have already tracked the exchange on the security feed. You're involved now, whether you like it or not." Before I could even process the threat, the clinic's lobby doors were shoved open. 2 men in dark, nondescript windbreakers stepped inside, their faces grim. They weren't patients. They weren't here for a checkup. They moved with a tactical efficiency that suggested they weren't interested in billing or insurance. They were looking directly at me, and one of them reached into his jacket, his hand hovering over an area that looked suspiciously like the silhouette of illegal equipment. The woman in the suit leaned in, her perfume smelling of cold metal and expensive ozone. You think you helped an old woman? You just acted as a courier for a dangerous, organized scheme. And now, the Service of Internal Verification is waiting outside to see exactly what you've handed over. My blood ran cold as I heard the wail of sirens approaching the clinic, cutting through the morning traffic. They weren't ambulances. They were something much faster, much louder, and far more lethal. The men in the lobby fanned out, cutting off the exits, and I realized with a sickening thud in my chest that the envelope didn't contain house deeds. It contained something that had just marked me for a massive investigation. I fumbled for my phone to call for help, but the lights in the lobby flickered and died, plunging the front desk into a terrifying, heavy silence. I looked toward the front entrance one last time, seeing a red laser dot dance across my chest. The red dot crawled across my white uniform, lingering over my heart like a burning brand. I couldn't move. My lungs felt like they were filled with wet sand, refusing to draw in a full breath. The two men in the lobby weren't just standing there. They were scanning the room, their eyes cold and calculating. The woman in the designer suit hadn't left. She was watching me with a look of clinical detachment, as if she were waiting to see how long it would take for my brain to fully comprehend the depth of the trap I'd walked into. "Don't reach for anything," one of the men said. His voice was gravelly, devoid of any human inflection. "The Service of Internal Verification is already in the building. You have 10 seconds to decide if you want to walk out of here as a witness or stay as a participant." I looked toward the clinic's side exit, praying that the manager, Mr. Henderson, would walk out of his office. He was a man of logic and strict protocol. Surely he'd see the absurdity of this. But the office remained closed, silent. I realized then that the silence wasn't natural. It was heavy, suffocating. Had they already neutralized everyone else? "I don't know what's in that envelope," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I just helped an old lady. She's a patient. She needed help with her property taxes." The woman laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the sterile white walls. "Property taxes? That's what they told you? That's almost charming." She stepped closer, her heels clicking rhythmically against the tile. "That woman you helped is a high-level accountant for a massive organized scheme that has been funneling illegal assets across the border for years. That envelope didn't have papers, darling. It had encrypted drives containing the ledgers for a dozen black market operations. And by taking it, by securing it for her, you've effectively tied your digital signature to the transfer." My stomach lurched. I thought of the online portals, the tax documents, the way I had logged into the City Hall system using my own credentials while she watched. Every step I took to help her had been a meticulously planned digital breadcrumb trail. She hadn't been an old lady in distress. She had been a ghost in the machine, and I was the perfect, naive accomplice to pin it on. "The Service of Internal Verification doesn't care about your good intentions," the man with the dark jacket continued, stepping closer until he was looming over the desk. "They see an unauthorized user accessing encrypted nodes and facilitating a handoff of sensitive hardware. To them, you're not a receptionist. You're a key player in an attempt to break the law with a high-stakes, life-altering charge." I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my fingernails began to bleed. "If I'm a key player, why are you talking to me? Why haven't you finished it?" The woman leaned over the counter, her face inches from mine. The scent of ozone was overwhelming now. "Because the drives were encrypted with a biometric key. When you touched that envelope, you didn't just carry it, you unknowingly initialized the decryption sequence. You are the only person who can unlock the data now. If you die, the information vanishes. If the Service of Internal Verification catches you, they'll bury you under an enormous sentence for what they think you've done." Suddenly, the heavy steel door at the back of the clinic hissed open. A team of men in tactical gear, not the ones in windbreakers, but the ones I recognized from the evening news as the elite internal security unit, flooded the hallway. They weren't holding clipboards. They were holding heavy weaponry and tactical shields. "Drop it!" they roared, their voices overlapping in a wall of sound. The two men in the lobby didn't run. They turned, and for a split second, I saw them reach into their jackets, pulling out black, matte-finished illegal weapons. My breath hitched. This was it. I was going to be caught in the crossfire of a war I didn't even know existed. "Get down!" one of the tactical officers screamed, his gaze locking onto me as he raised his aim. I dove behind the heavy reinforced glass of the reception desk just as the first deafening, ear-piercing blast shattered the lobby windows. The world turned into a nightmare of flying glass, flashing lights, and the screams of people I hadn't even realized were still in the waiting room. A piece of shrapnel grazed my shoulder, hot and stinging, but I didn't feel the pain, only a paralyzing terror. As the firing intensified, I saw the woman in the suit duck behind a heavy marble pillar. She looked back at me, her face twisted into a cruel grin. She pulled a small device from her pocket and tossed it onto my desk. It clattered against the wood, a small, blinking LED light indicating it was active. "You have two choices, little angel," she shouted over the roar of the conflict. "You can stay here and hope the Service of Internal Verification believes you're innocent, or you can press the green button on that tracker and get out of the back alley before they realize you're the one who holds the key to the Empire." I stared at the device. If I stayed, I was facing a permanent cage for a crime I didn't commit. If I ran, I was confirming my guilt in the eyes of the law. Outside, the sirens grew deafening, and I heard the screech of tires as a black SUV crashed through the glass barricade of the emergency entrance, blocking my only path to the parking lot. The driver, wearing a mask, leaned out the window and fired a single shot into the air, signaling that the getaway was starting. I had 3 seconds to choose before the tactical team rounded the corner and saw me holding the very device that proved I was the courier. I reached for the button, my finger hovering, shaking uncontrollably, when a boot slammed down on my desk, pinning my hand in place. The weight of the boot was heavy, calculated, and intentional. I looked up, expecting the woman in the suit, but instead I found myself staring into the eyes of one of the tactical officers. He wasn't looking at me like a civilian in danger. He was looking at me like a problem to be solved. He leaned down, the visor of his helmet reflecting the chaotic strobe of the emergency lights, and whispered something that froze the blood in my veins. "Don't move and don't press that button," he hissed, his voice modulating through his equipment. "If you hit that, you trigger a remote wipe of the entire local network. You'll erase everything, including the evidence that proves you were framed." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I just wanted to help her. I don't know anything about encryption or ledgers. He didn't blink. "I know. We've been tracking this organized scheme for months. Mrs. Gable isn't a patient. She's a high-level courier who picks up assets from unsuspecting victims to serve as human shields. You were chosen because your background check was spotless. Your credit was clean and you had no connections to the underworld. You were the perfect decoy." Before I could ask for help, a deafening explosion ripped through the ceiling of the clinic's main hall. Dust, debris, and the sharp metallic smell of smoke flooded the space. The ceiling panels groaned and buckled, and through the gap I saw them, black-clad figures rappelling down like spiders, ignoring the tactical officers entirely. They weren't fighting the police. They were extracting someone. "Stay low!" the officer barked, finally removing his boot from my hand and shoving me toward the heavy, reinforced desk cabinets. I scrambled underneath, clutching the small device the woman had left behind. It was pulsing now, a soft, rhythmic green light that seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. My mind was racing. If the officer was telling the truth, I was a pawn in a game that spanned continents. If he was lying, if he was part of the group trying to silence me, I was already dead. Suddenly, the firing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was heavy, expectant, and absolute. I peered through the gap in the mahogany cabinetry. The lobby was a graveyard of broken glass and overturned furniture. The tactical team was gone, vanished as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind only their discarded gear. The woman in the suit was nowhere to be seen. But there was someone else. A man walked slowly through the center of the lobby, his boots crunching on the shattered glass. He was wearing an expensive charcoal gray suit, and he held a smartphone in his hand, scrolling through it with agonizing casualness. He stopped in front of my desk and looked down at the floor, right at where I was hiding. "You can come out, Sarah," he said, his voice calm, polite, and terrifyingly familiar. It was the head administrator of the clinic, the man who hired me, the man who gave me my annual performance reviews. "It's over. The internal service has cleared the building, and the danger has moved on to the next phase." I didn't move. My pulse was a frantic drumbeat in my ears. "Sarah, please," he continued, pulling a small black badge from his pocket. It didn't look like an ID card. It looked like a warrant. "You are currently holding a device that, if left active, will send a signal to a satellite over the city. That signal will activate a localized EMP burst. It won't just erase the data on the drives. It will fry the power grid for 3 city blocks, including the hospital across the street." My grip on the device tightened. "You're lying," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You're one of them. You let her walk right in here." He sighed, sounding genuinely disappointed. "I let her walk in here because I needed to see if you would follow your instincts. You were tempted to press the button, weren't you? You wanted to escape the blame. That makes you a liability." He crouched down, his face now level with the opening under the desk. His eyes were cold, devoid of any professional warmth. He held out his hand, palm up. "Give me the device and I can make this go away. I can wipe your digital history, get you a new identity, and have you out of the city by sunrise. Or you can keep holding it, and I'll have to let the Service of Internal Verification handle the situation their way. And trust me, they aren't as polite as I am." I looked at the device, then at his hand. My fingers were hovering over the green button again. I realized then that the device wasn't just a tracker or a wipe trigger. It was a phone, and it was vibrating. A text message appeared on the screen, illuminating the dark space beneath the desk in a sickly pale light. "Do not give it to him. He is the one who sent the package. Run." I looked up at him, my breath hitching, and realized he had seen the message on the screen too. His expression shifted from patient administrator to something predatory. He reached into his jacket, and for the first time, I didn't see a badge or an ID. I saw the cold black barrel of a silenced weapon. The silence in the clinic was shattered by the cold metallic snick of the pistol's slide being pulled back. My administrator, my mentor, the man who had signed my paychecks for 3 years, was no longer looking at me with the eyes of a colleague. He was looking at me like an obstacle to be cleared from a ledger. I didn't think. I lunged. I threw the heavy metal stapler from my desk toward his face, not to harm him, but to buy a millisecond of chaos. As the stapler arched through the air, he flinched, his shot going wide and splintering the oak paneling inches above my head. I scrambled backward, crawling through the wreckage of the lobby, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped animal. I had to get to the employee locker room in the basement. It had a reinforced door, and more importantly, it had a secondary exit that led directly into the subway maintenance tunnels, a labyrinth I'd learned about while mapping out the clinic's fire safety plan. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," his voice boomed, cold and detached, echoing off the high ceilings. "You have no idea what you're carrying. That isn't just data. It's the entire blueprint for the organized scheme's infrastructure. If that device leaves this building, you're not just a criminal. You're a target for every agency, government, and shadow group from here to the coast." I didn't answer. I reached the locker room, threw my weight against the heavy steel door, and slid the iron bolt into place just as a heavy thud slammed against the other side. He was right behind me. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely manage the lock, but I finally clicked the keypad for the maintenance hatch. The wall shifted, revealing the dark, damp tunnel that smelled of ozone and stagnant water. I dove inside, the small tracker still clutched in my palm, its green light casting long, spectral shadows against the brick walls of the tunnel. I began to run, my heels clicking frantically against the metal grating. I had to find a way out, a way to connect to a secure network, a way to upload what was on this device before they caught me. As I rounded a bend in the tunnel, a light cut through the gloom ahead. It wasn't the dim glow of maintenance work. It was a high-intensity tactical flashlight. I skidded to a halt, my chest heaving. Standing in the middle of the tunnel was not my administrator and not the police. It was the woman in the designer suit from the lobby, her face no longer composed, but smeared with dust and sweat. She held a different, more sophisticated-looking device in her hand, a signal jammer. "Stop running," she said, her voice echoing in the confined space. "I'm not here to kill you, Sarah. I'm the one who sent that text message." I held the tracker up, my knuckles white. You're the one who set this whole thing in motion. You used that old woman." "I used her because she was the only one they wouldn't monitor," she replied, stepping closer, her movements graceful but guarded. "My team has been trying to take down this organized scheme for 6 years. We needed a clean slate, someone who wasn't in their database. You were the only one who didn't trigger their predictive algorithms. You were a glitch in their system. That's why you're still alive." I felt a surge of hysterical laughter building in my throat. "So what now? You take the drive, you clear my name, and I go back to being a receptionist? That dream died the moment I walked into this nightmare." She shook her head, a grim shadow passing over her features. "There is no going back, Sarah. Once you've seen the depth of this corruption, you're either an asset or a casualty. The man behind you, he's not just an administrator. He's the architect of the whole illegal operation. If he catches you here, he won't just kill you, he'll implicate you in the attempt to destroy the city's power grid. You'll be the face of the tragedy, the scapegoat they need to explain away the mass casualties they're planning tonight." "Planning?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean, planning?" She pointed to the device in my hand. "That tracker? It's not a file storage unit. It's a detonator. He gave it to you to ensure that when the internal service closes in, the signal is triggered by your biometric key. He's going to frame you for the entire explosion. And look behind you." I turned, and my blood turned to ice. The tunnel behind me was filling with a thick, acrid gas. The administrator wasn't coming after me with a gun anymore. He was going to turn the entire tunnel into a tomb. And from the darkness ahead, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots, not 1 or 2, but a dozen. They were coming from both sides. We were caught in a pincer movement, and the air was quickly becoming impossible to breathe. "Press it," she suddenly hissed, holding out her own device. "If you press your tracker now, it won't trigger the explosion. It will trigger a back-channel override to the Service of Internal Verification secure server. It will leak everything, the names, the bank accounts, the locations. It will burn the whole organized scheme to the ground. But it will also broadcast your GPS coordinates to everyone in the city who wants you erased." I looked at her, then at the green button. I looked at the encroaching gas and the shadows closing in. The walls of the tunnel seemed to be closing in on me. I realized that the only way to save the city was to sacrifice my own chance at ever having a normal life again. I took a deep breath, my thumb trembling over the plastic, and just as I pressed down, the tunnel floor beneath me groaned and gave way. I wasn't falling into the dark. I was falling into a trap door that hadn't been on any of the clinic's blueprints. I landed hard in a small, windowless concrete room, and as the floor slid shut above me, the only light left was the rapidly fading green glow of the device in my hand as the signal began its broadcast. The door at the far end of the room creaked open, and a voice I hadn't heard in years, a voice that was supposed to be dead, whispered my name from the darkness. The voice that whispered my name was one I had buried deep in my memory, a ghost from a childhood that ended in fire and secrets. It was my father. He stood in the corner of the small, reinforced concrete room, his silhouette framed by the harsh, flickering glow of a computer terminal. He looked older, gaunt, his face a map of the years he'd spent in hiding since the accident that took my mother. My breath hitched in my throat, the air heavy with the scent of ozone and the humming of a massive server stack in the center of the room. "Dad," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the low drone of the machinery. "How? You were supposed to be gone. The clinic. The administrator." "The administrator is just a middleman, Sarah," he said, stepping into the light. His eyes were hard, but they lacked the malice of the men who had been hunting me. "He thinks he's the architect, but he's just a symptom of a much larger, more dangerous organized scheme. I've been building this infrastructure from the inside for years, waiting for the moment when I could expose them all. And tonight, with that tracker, you gave me the final key." He reached out, his hand shaking slightly as he took the device from my numb fingers. As he plugged it into the console, the entire room erupted in a symphony of high-pitched chirps and flashing amber lights. On the massive wall screen in front of us, names, dates, offshore bank accounts, and logistical maps began to scroll by in a blur of incriminating evidence. It was everything. The trafficking routes, the shadow funding, the corrupt officials who had allowed this organized scheme to bleed the city dry. "You didn't frame me," I realized, the pieces finally clicking together with a sickening, tragic clarity. "You used me. You knew they would target the person who helped the old lady. You knew I was the perfect, clean variable to trigger their defensive protocols." He didn't deny it. He kept his eyes fixed on the terminal, his fingers dancing across the keys. "I had to ensure you stayed clean until the final moment, Sarah. If you had known, if you had been part of the network, they would have smelled the deception. Your innocence was your armor. It's what allowed you to bypass their internal security without tripping a single alarm." Suddenly the room shuddered. A muffled explosion sounded from above, and dust poured down from the ceiling. They had found the tunnel. They were coming for us. "We don't have much time," my father said, his voice urgent. "Once I hit send, this data goes directly to the public airwaves and every major news outlet in the country. They won't be able to bury it, and they won't be able to spin it, but it also reveals this location. We have to go." "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, my voice hardening. The fear was still there, but a new cold clarity had replaced my terror. "You treated me like a pawn in your war. I'm not your soldier, and I'm not your daughter anymore." He looked at me, a flicker of genuine regret crossing his face, but he didn't stop typing. "I did what had to be done to save this city. Maybe you'll understand that one day." He slammed his hand onto the enter key. A surge of power pulsed through the walls, and the terminal went black. Outside, I heard the sound of sirens, hundreds of them, converging on the area. The Service of Internal Security had finally been alerted, but not by the administrator. They were being led here by the sheer volume of the data leak that was currently being broadcast to every screen in the city. In the confusion, I didn't follow him to the secondary exit. I slipped into the shadows, finding a maintenance ladder that led up into the city's sewer system, miles away from the clinic. I climbed until my muscles burned, emerging in an alleyway just as the dawn began to break over the skyline. The streets were already filled with police cruisers and emergency vehicles, the chaos of the night giving way to the cold, hard reality of the morning. I watched from the shadows as the building that once housed the clinic was swarmed. I saw the administrator being dragged out in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. I saw the woman in the suit being escorted away by federal agents, her composure shattered. My father was nowhere to be seen. He had vanished into the darkness that had defined his life, leaving behind the wreckage of his mission and me. A few days later, I was sitting in a small, quiet cafe in a different part of the state. My name was legally changed, my history scrubbed by an anonymous benefactor who had finally realized the scope of the corruption I'd exposed. I looked out the window at the peaceful street. The city was still reeling from the fallout, with new investigations announced every hour. The organized scheme had been dismantled piece by piece, its influence eradicated in a single night of digital fire. My phone, a burner I'd purchased with cash, buzzed in my pocket. A single text message appeared on the screen. "Thank you, Sarah. You saved more lives than you will ever know. Don't look for me. Keep living. That is the only victory that matters." I stared at the screen for a long time. I thought about the clinic, the fragile old woman, and the terrifying hollow feeling of being a pawn in a game I never asked to play. I left the phone on the table, walked out into the bright morning sunlight, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. I had my freedom, and in the end, that was the only truth that held any weight at all. The nightmare was over, and I was finally, truly, my own person.